Welcome to StatTrek's video tutorial on advanced placement statistics. This lesson covers methods of data collection. In this lesson, we will describe four methods of data collection: a census, a sample survey, an experiment, and an observational study. First, let's compare a census and a sample survey. Both methods are used to gather information about population attributes. A census gathers data from every member of a population. A sample survey obtains data from a subset of a population. Each method has advantages and disadvantages. A census is generally more accurate. When population size is large, a sample generally requires fewer resources, less time, money, and manpower. Suppose you wanted to know the average weight of a student enrolled at Harvard University. You could answer this question with a census or with a sample survey. If you weighed every single student, you would be conducting a census. If you weighed fewer students, you would be conducting a sample survey. The census would probably provide a more accurate measure since you weighed every student. But the sample survey would probably cost less and be easier to administer, since you didn't have to weigh every single student. Now, let's compare experiments and observational studies. Both of these methods are used to investigate relationships between variables, and the main research question is often whether one variable causes another variable. That is, does X cause Y? To answer this question, researchers measure variables of interest in different groups of subjects. With experiments, researchers assign treatments to groups and then measure effects of those treatments. With observational studies, researchers study naturally occurring groups and look for patterns of relationship between variables. The key difference between the two methods has to do with control. With an experiment, the researcher controls how subjects are assigned to groups and which levels of variable each group receives. But with an observational study, the researcher does not control group assignment or variable levels. And because experiments permit a greater level of control, well-designed experiments can be less vulnerable to bias than are observational studies. Suppose you wanted to assess the effectiveness of a new flu vaccine. You could conduct an experiment, or you could perform an observational study. If you conducted an experiment, you might assign half the subjects to a treatment group and half to a control group. You might vaccinate subjects in the treatment group, but not in the control group. Then, you would compare flu symptoms across groups. If the treatment group had less flu than the control group, you might conclude that the vaccine was effective. With an observational study, you would examine naturally occurring groups made up of those who got a flu shot versus those who did not. Then, you would compare flu symptoms across these naturally occurring groups. Notice that the researchers in the observational study do not determine who gets flu shots. The subjects make that decision themselves. Let's summarize. In this lesson, we talked about 4 methods of data collection: the census, sample survey, experiment, and observational study. Researchers often use the census and sample survey to understand population parameters. A census obtains data from every member of the population. It provides accurate measures of population parameters, but can be costly and time-consuming. A sample survey obtains data from a subset of the population in order to estimate population parameters. A survey can often be administered quicker, easier, and cheaper than a census. Researchers use experiments and observational studies to understand relationships between variables. Experiments use artificial groups in which the researcher controls the treatment each subject sees. Observational studies use naturally occurring groups in which the researcher has no influence on how treatments are assigned to subjects. Because researchers have more control over subjects and treatments in an experiment, experiments can be less vulnerable to bias than are observational studies.